Now let's move to today's perspective. And last week was one of those historic weeks in US politics. For the first time, a former US president faces criminal charges. I'm talking, of course, of Donald Trump for the alleged hush money payments he made to the porn star Stormy Daniels just before the 2016 election. But even if he escapes somehow these legal proceedings, well, there are numerous others knocking at his door as well. Joining us is Hungarian-American lawyer Brody. He's a human rights lawyer, a war crimes prosecutor, and a former New York prosecutor as well. He joins us now from the south of France. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. Let's talk first of all about the initial case, the case which, of course, made all those news headlines last week. Where does the process go from here, and why do you think it's so important?
Well, from here now, we have the indictment. The next step is that both parties will file motions. The prosecutor is required to turn over to Donald Trump's defense team all of the evidence, both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence, within 45 days. The prosecutor is actually seeking a gag order on that evidence so that Trump does not piecemeal send out evidence to the press. Trump's team is certainly going to file motions challenging the indictment, challenging the legal sufficiency, challenging the theory that it's based on, probably trying to move the case outside of the borough of Manhattan, where he says he cannot get a fair trial. The judge has set the next court hearing, I believe, for December and wants to have a trial early next year. Trump's team has said that might be too fast. And
we mustn't forget, of course, there are other cases as well that he could also be indicted for as this is going on, notably the removal of government documents from the White House, the role of Trump in that attack, of course, on the US Capitol when his supporters invaded.
Well, of course, those are much more serious charges. You described the taking of the classified documents where in Mar-a-Lago, where Trump allegedly not only took the documents but hid them, moved them away once the government found out that the documents were there, that he further concealed them, that he made a false statement saying he'd given all the documents back. There's also, of course, the case in Georgia, where Trump is accused of having pressured state officials to try to overturn the results of the elections. There's a very now widely circulated telephone call, which was recorded, in which we hear the President of the United States telling the Georgian authorities, can't you find me 11,000 votes, guys? And then you have the big one, the attempt to overturn the election nationally, which all the events leading up to the January 6th insurrection, which Trump is accused of having first fostered the lie that he lost the elections, and then egged on a crowd to storm the Capitol, and then for 3 hours, as this riot was taking place, he failed to do anything. And those are much more significant crimes. I mean, when we say this is the first time a president has been indicted, a former president, it's not because it's the first time a former president has allegedly committed crimes. Richard Nixon was famously an unindicted co-conspirator in Watergate, but he was pardoned by Gerald Ford. Ronald Reagan was, involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, in which arms were illegally sold to Iran. The proceeds were illegally diverted to support the Nicaraguan Contras. And, George Bush illegally invaded a foreign country, Iraq. George Bush approved the torture. He approved waterboarding. Under his administration, the government oversaw a program of secret prisons in which Muslim, so I'm just, and there's been a tradition that you don't prosecute. And each time, and President Obama, in the case of Bush's alleged war crimes, said, we're moving forward, we're not moving back.
All these cases about Trump, I mean, we've mentioned a series of them now. What image do you think it gives? Because to people who are obviously not Donald Trump supporters, you would imagine that all this makes it very, very difficult for him to follow through with that pledge to run for president next year. But for his supporters, potentially not, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think this first indictment, precisely because it's not on the level of, election overturning. It's not on the level of, challenge to democracy. This particular indictment, and I'm sure that the facts and the evidence show that there was criminal activity in the payment of the hush money and the covering it up. But it's a very garden variety financial crime. And to many, it trivializes the danger, let's say, that Donald Trump represents for American democracy. And because this came first, which I think many people, including myself, feel is unfortunate, it has probably solidified his grip on the Republican Party. It has allowed him to be where he wants to be, at the center of attention, sucking the air out of everybody else. The Republicans are obliged to kind of line up behind him. But it's not going to help him with the wider public. And certainly when the other indictments, as are expected, come down, the ones that really show his refusal to concede the election and his attempts to overturn that election, I think this is going to hurt him with the general public. So it's going to help him with Republicans, but hurt him with the general public.
So it's almost like there's a split. It's those hardened Trump fans will support him even further and say that this is all political. But then again, there's those more moderate Republicans who will not go behind Donald Trump on this.
I think, a lot of Americans in the middle, I mean, we saw in the last elections, in the midterms, that although Trump does retain a grip on a very strong number of Americans, that there are enough Americans in the middle who don't want this circus, who are tired of crazy, who don't want, American discourse to revolve around, this soap opera of Donald Trump, who want to see, normal politics, bipartisan, even if possible, politics. And so I think in the short term, it's going to help him. It may help him all the way through, depending on the timing of these things, could help him to fend off challengers for the nomination. But I don't see a lot of Americans voting for another 4 years of this.
We shall see. It's all to play for in the next year or so. Ree Brody, thanks very much for talking to us on the programme today. Ree Brody, a human rights lawyer, war crimes prosecutor, also former New York prosecutor as well. Thanks very much for joining us from the south of France there for today's perspective.